Gracious God, give us the perception to hear your voice in the stillness of the night, in the sigh of an infant, in the stirrings of our hearts, and in all the other ways you speak to us. Amen. We all have them. Dates from the past when we know exactly where we were, exactly what we were doing. Dates like September 11th, 2001, the day of the attack on the Twin Towers, or November 22nd, 1963, the day President Kennedy was shot. In addition to these dates of public significance, though, we all have dates of profound private meaning. Dates that signify nothing to anyone else, but which mean a great deal to us individually. One such date for me is June 21, 1974. I could even give you the precise time. It was 3:20 in the afternoon. I can tell you exactly where I was, exactly what I was doing. On June 21, 1974, at 3:20 in the afternoon, I was in the delivery room with my first wife, Pam. Along with us was a doctor and a nurse. By that point, my wife had been in labor about 12 hours. I had been with her the whole time, but the struggle was hers alone. I timed the contractions, tried to get her to pace her breathing, and offered what encouragement I could, but I felt so helpless. As I watched my wife, I thought often of marathon runners, athletes who push themselves to go step after step, long after every ounce of energy seems to have been wrung out of them. There was the same fatigue, the same desperate determination. The difference, of course, was that they could have stopped if they wanted. They also knew exactly how far ahead the finish line lay. Neither of these were true here. The hours seemed endless. All at once, something changed in my wife's expression. She sat up and called the nurse. The nurse took one look at her, notified the doctor, and wheeled her into the delivery room. What came next was just a blur to me. The doctor barking instructions, the nurse darting about the room, my wife concentrating with all her strength, straining with supreme effort. Suddenly, there came a tiny cry. "It's a boy," the doctor said, "a healthy boy." My wife lay back and turned to me. "Happy birthday," she breathed. "I'm afraid there's no cake, but I hope you like your present." The nurse stopped in her tracks and stared. "She's joking, right?" she said. "It's not really your birthday, is it?" "No, it's no joke," I said. "I'm 23 years old today." The nurse just shook her head. "Oh my goodness," she said. "What's she possibly going to get for you next year?" The doctor gave the baby to my wife, who held him briefly. Then the nurse took him. She washed him, weighed him, and wrapped him in a blanket. Then she returned. This time, though, she did something I did not expect. She handed the baby not to his mother again, but to me. Suddenly, it was I who was holding him. I who had my arms around this tiny being who was encountering the world for the first time. I remember just staring at him. I simply could not take it in. I could not quite believe that he was here, that he was real. In the past 9 months, I had, of course, thought constantly of the baby. But it had been just that, the baby, something abstract, indefinite, insubstantial. Now suddenly, here he was. I was meeting him for the first time. This boy who, never visible, had been so much a part of our lives for so many months. He was no longer just the baby. He was a unique person. His eyes were open. He looked all around him. He was studying the world that was for him incomprehensible and unnamed. His hair was light. His hand had slipped out of the blanket. It was clenched in a tiny fist. The feelings were overwhelming. I felt such awe, such wonder. Here, out of nowhere, was a life. Where had it been in all those tens of thousands of years in which other human beings had been born, had lived and died, in which civilizations grew, flourished, and declined? Where had this life been 100,000 years ago, when our ancestors hunted with spears? Where had it been 10,000 years ago, when the first cities were built? Or 2,000 years ago, when Rome ruled the known world? Where was it 100 years ago? 10 years ago? Where had this life been then? And what lay ahead? Where would this life be in 10 years? In 20 years? In 100 years? In 1,000? All these questions washed over me in a great wave of astonishment. Then suddenly the questions all passed away, replaced by something else, something calmer, something I recognized at once. I realized in that moment that I loved this child, loved this boy at our very first meeting, loved him completely, profoundly, with a love that would never stop. Where he was going was uncertain, but one thing was not. Wherever it was, he would go there with my love. What does it mean to be called? What does it mean to be called? That's the question at the heart of today's reading from the book of Samuel. And as I read it, I thought immediately of that day of private meeting, June 21, 1974. The reading gives us a beautiful little story of the calling of Samuel. In time, Samuel would become one of the great prophets and judges of ancient Israel, but at this point, he's only a child. Jewish tradition places his age here at about 12, but he may have been even younger still. Samuel was a servant to Eli, the high priest. Samuel had a few basic chores. One of the things that he had to do was to sleep every night in that part of the sanctuary where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, the sacred chest which housed the tablets of the Ten Commandments. It was his job to make sure that the lamp remained lit throughout the night. It was while doing this, in the stillness of the night, that Samuel first heard God calling him. What exactly that meant, we can only guess. One thing the story makes a point of noting, though, was that this was a period when, quote, the words of the Lord were rare, unquote. This does not mean that God had stopped speaking, of course. It meant only that most people no longer knew what to listen for, or else that they had come to doubt what they heard. That's why it's so significant that in the end, it is a child unfettered by expectations of what is and it is not possible, who finally heard God speaking again. Even so, he assumes that it was his master Eli he was calling, and in a manner of all good stories, Samuel has to go to Eli 3 times before it occurs to the high priest that what's really going on. At that point, though, Eli gives the boy some truly wonderful advice. Go lie down, he says. And if God calls you, you shall say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. This is a story as much as anything about the fact that God really does speak to us, doing so in ways and at times that we least expect. So what does it mean to be called? Just this. To be called refers to that moment when we realize that there is a force far greater than ourselves working in our lives. A force that is holding us, a force that is guiding us, a force that is loving us. Even as it is opening us to hold, to guide, and to love others. The truth is that God's call is not far from us. It is not foreign. It is not rare. We are wired to receive it every moment of our lives. It is woven in the very fabric of who we are. It is part of our blood and sinews. It is there in our capacity to love, our capacity to feel united with another human being. Every time you feel love and the impulse to love, you are receiving a call from God. Every time you feel warmth and a connection with another human being, either friend or stranger, you are receiving a call from God. The truth is that on that day of private meeting, June 21, 1974, I did not give to myself my capacity to love. I did not create that powerful, life-transforming connection between me and a tiny being who I was meeting for the first time in my life. It was given to me. It was given to me by a force infinitely greater than myself, a force in which I did not even yet believe. It was a gift. It was a call. It was a call on many levels. On one level, it said, love this child. Care for this child. It was also saying something deeper, though. It was saying, love this child as I love you. Care for this child as I care for you. In the years that followed, I have tried as best I can to live up to that first part, the call to love others, failing in all too many ways. I have also tried to hold on to the second part, the call to remember that I too am loved, but all too often have forgotten this too. Luckily, I have since learned that neither failing nor forgetting can ever stop this love. Nothing can. The call never stops. Amen.